Stefan, we have a ton to talk about and what has been just a bonkers match day. And, we want to talk about the big game, which was this week, was on Sunday, and this Topspiel, Bayern, Frankfurt against Bayern. This is a game that always comes with a lot of fireworks, and it definitely did this time too. But it also gets us to a really big theme of this early Bundesliga season. So between 8th place Stuttgart and first place Bayern, there is just 5 points on the top of the Bundesliga table. It's tight. It is so very tight. It seems like this is one of those years where just nobody wants to win the Bundesliga title, Stefan. All these teams have so many flaws, and this is why they're dropping points left, right, and center.
Yeah, our weekly Bayern fan group, supporter group, which I think we probably have to rename the Gegenpressing Substack chat to at this rate, was obviously distraught after this game. So, hey, if you're looking for a reason to sign up to the podcast, sign up to the Substack, that might be reason enough. If you're a Dortmund fan, a Leverkusen fan, a Leipzig fan, Hamburg fan, HSV fan, whatever.
Hey, they won this weekend.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say, it's a great place if you're looking for it, if you're looking to kind of enjoy some schadenfreude of Bayern fans being furious, then our Substack chat seems to be the place to be right now, because there's some very angry people during the game and after the game. And yeah, I don't know what to say, Manu. We sat here, 2 weeks ago after the Werder Bremen game, after Bayern had scored 29 goals in 9 games, won every single match, looked like the Harlem Globetrotters, and we said, look, we can't really say anything until they then face these 5 or 6 new difficult tasks, these 5 or 6 difficult opponents coming up, and we're now kind of halfway through that now. We still have Stuttgart and Barcelona to play after the international break, but I think the first 3 games, in different ways, each and every one of them, have kind of exposed where Vincent Kompany still has a lot of issues in his team. And I think this game in particular was really, really fascinating because, in a sense, Bayern were outstanding. In a sense, they were flawless. In a sense, they were, they passed Frankfurt off the pitch. They pressed Frankfurt off the pitch. I've got Frankfurt's average position open in front of me, and it's hilarious. It's more or less 10 guys lined up on the edge of the Frankfurt box for 90 minutes. So, it's probably exactly what Bayern fans wanted to see from a team. And yet, Frankfurt went up the pitch 3 times and scored 3 goals and reigned all over Bayern Munich's parade.
Yeah, but yet that was so very predictable that it would happen, right? I mean, I think this is one of the things that we both highlighted going into this match, that going out of the Aston Villa result, which I still think if they played that 10 times, Bayern probably win it 9 times, but because they had that inability to score. I mean, Martinez was incredible for Aston Villa, and I would go as far that Bayern Munich were perhaps a little lucky that Frankfurt opted to play without a goalkeeper in this game. So, it was made a little bit easier for them to score 3 goals. But the blueprint was the same, and we both pointed out Omar Mamouche is going to be a real big problem for Bayern Munich if they play the way that they played defensively in the Aston Villa game, or even in the Leverkusen game, where it only took 1 shot by Robert Andrich to score. And the upside is, okay, Bayern Munich finally found a net. Again, I think they had some help in that regard, but it's just so easy to slice them open. And if you're an opponent right now, you happily give them the ball because, the chances that they create, I think the XG was about 2 something in this match. So relatively high. But you know that when you get opportunities to turn them over and hit them quick on the counterattack, chances are that you then have a good 40, 50 meters of open space to run at Manuel Neuer. And what is he supposed to do in that situation, right? Like, as a goalkeeper, if you have a striker like Mamouche coming at you one-on-one, that's harsh. But the second goal, it was not just Mamouche who came on one-on-one. It was a 2-on-1 with Mamouche and Ekitike, 2 of the most informed strikers in German football. And they're going to score that. They're just going to put that away because that's just the kind of run that they're on, right? And so, I felt a little bad for him because, he was definitely at fault at the Aston Villa game. I don't know what he could have done in any of those situations, but it's just so predictable that Bayern Munich will give these counterattacks away. and so many times every single game. And unfortunately, this time around, they were punished for it because the opponent had two strikers in I would actually go as far as saying world-class form. Mamouche is definitely the most informed striker in Europe at the moment, and Ekitike isn't far behind. So, you can be tactically great and you can play this wonderful football and all that sort of stuff, but if you have such significant flaws in your defensive game, opponents like Frankfurt will strike at you. And as you mentioned it, it's not going to get easier. I think Lewandowski had a hat-trick today, right? Stuttgart, yeah, okay, they only got a point against Hoffenheim, but I mentioned the table. They're still not that far away from the top of the table because of how the results have panned out everywhere around them. And in Demirovic and Undav, they have the sort of strikers that quite happily will be using this kind of situation that Bayern seems to be giving away. So it's not going to get easier. And if you Vincent Kompany, you can point at all the great things, but the fact is still that from the last season's problems in Bayern Munich's defense that undid them over and over again and ultimately led to what was a pretty average Bundesliga season, all these problems are still there.
Yeah, I think if there's a theme to this weekend with the clubs we're going to talk about in the show, it does seem to be defenders coming up short in their own individual battles. And throughout this game, I was just kind of struck by just how much work Upamecano and Kim gave each other to do, in the sense that just about every goal that Frankfurt score in this game is because the pair of them are just being so proactive and so aggressive to win the ball back that it actually plays into Frankfurt's hands. So, for example, first goal, which is Marmoush kind of making a diagonal cross from left to right into the middle of the pitch, and he gets played through, and Kimmich's chasing him back. That run doesn't get made unless Kim and Upamecano haven't pushed up so far and allowed Marmoush to run in behind. And his finish was outstanding, as you said. He's in remarkable form. The second goal came about from Upamecano trying to beat Marmoush to a simple ball at the park. Marmoush turns him and is able to outrun him because he's quicker. And, that's just to say, he then obviously squares the ball to Hugo Ekitike, and he scores a great finish. Again, just outstanding from Marmoush. And then even the third goal, we discussed this in the chat, that it comes about from Kim. I can't remember who it was he was marking. I've got the play in front of me here, actually. I'll just double check. But yeah, I think it is actually Marmoush. He runs out to head a ball, which Marmoush is collecting in the middle of the pitch. And because he commits himself to the header, and he actually wins the header, but he heads the ball straight to a Frankfurt player. And I've got this still, which is like 2 or 3 frames after Kim has made that header. Marmoush is like 5 feet in front of him. And at that point, Eric Dyer's come on.
Who's on Ebimbe in that header?
I think it was Ebimbe, yeah.
Ebimbe, someone turns over, which would have been a foul if the ball hadn't ended up with Marmoush. But hey, but who was on him? I can't 100% remember. Was that Kim?
Who was on Marmoush?
No, Ebimbe.
Well, it was the right backs. I think it was Guerrero. Oh no, it's Limer. Okay. Limer's on him at that point. So Kim basically heads the ball straight to him. He then gets a head on it himself to knock into the path of Marmoush. And then Marmoush is basically in a foot race with Eric Dyer, which he obviously wins. But
game over.
And the thing is that, like, Eric Dyer, you can see Eric Dyer being like, why the hell is this guy, why is he 5 feet in front of Kim? And it's because Kim has been so aggressive to try and win a ball that he could just contain, just need to hold the guy, just contain him rather than trying. And this is what Kim and Upamecano do time and time again. The player, both of them try to run through their opposing players to get to that ball rather than just hold on to them, which I don't really understand because they're both pretty quick players. It's not as if they have to beat the man to the ball to stop him running past them. And I do kind of wonder if this is just a symptomatic thing of Kompany style play, because obviously Kompany has Bayern playing a very aggressive, attacking, pressing and counter pressing style of football. I mean, Bayern were outstanding in that first half about winning the ball back, and obviously you can only do that if the defenders do it too. But the problem is that Kim and Upamecano are basically just doing the same pressing that Coman or Gnabry or Kimmich are doing at their parts of the pitch. The difference is that they're up against guys who can turn them very quickly, and that's what happened time after time after time again. And as you said, Marmoush is just in this incredible run of form. And actually, I'll say that to our subscribers in the chat, that as soon as that ball gets played through for Marmoush, you could put your house on him scoring that. He's got 3 Bayern defenders running in on him, and you can see he just takes a breath and just slots into the far corner. And that's just the sign of a striker who's just at the absolute peak of his powers right there. But it's kind of what we saw against Aston Villa. We didn't really see it for Leverkusen because it didn't really do too much attacking. But you suspect that a lot of clubs will be watching these 2 games in particular and thinking, right, that's the blueprint to score goals against Bayern Munich this season.
Stuttgart will have watched that with glee, because I think if all the troubles that they have are because other teams are doing what teams are doing to Bayern Munich right now. But we'll get to that. I was thinking while you were talking about Kim and Upamecano being so forward thinking, like so aggressive, right? And like individually, that's fine, right? I mean, in fact, Kim was called the monster at Napoli because of that style of defending. And that's fine if you have a counterweight to that. But right now you're having 2 defenders doing the same thing and, with a high line. So for moving the line even further up, right? And that creates this acres of space. It's so much space in these goals. And it is really remarkable. And so I wonder, I think if you play one of them with another center back, then that's probably less profound. But because you're playing them together and you know that aggressiveness is an issue, and ultimately they also came from clubs where there was a different style of football being played, right? Less possession, more counter-pressing, fast forward. I mean, Leipzig for Upamecano, Napoli for Kim. And so maybe that just doesn't fit Bayern Munich's style. And that, I think, is a really big issue here. And so I wonder that the moment Ito and Stanisic come back, if that will fixes itself, because those 2 guys will just end up on the bench.
Yeah, the other thing that I thought of as well is, and it was something I was thinking about, I took the dog out for a walk after the Bayern game and I was kind of mulling the game over. And I was thinking that, okay, so Kompany's trying to implement this style of football that basically Pep Guardiola did. And obviously he taught Kompany how to do it at Manchester City. And the way that Manchester City get around this problem is that they just basically don't play fullbacks. If you watch Pep Guardiola's teams in the Premier League, they have they've got Guardiola at left back. Everyone obviously who follows German football knows who Guardiola is. He's a central defender, but he plays left back for Manchester City. And on the right, they have Kyle Walker, who was a fullback, but in the last 2 or 3 seasons has developed into a very defensive fullback. And basically what that means is that when Manchester City kind of impose themselves on teams and really press them high up the pitch, they've basically got this back 4 of players that all make sure that none of them really overexert themselves or overcommit to anything. Yeah, of course, Guardiola and Walker are swinging cross and stuff, but they're not fullbacks in the way that Bayern are still playing their fullbacks, in the sense that Alphonso Davies is absolutely hoofing it up and down the wing. Kimmich on the right, or Guerrero on the right. Sorry, obviously Leimer came on for him and later in the game.
Yeah.
So I wonder, as you said, if once Kompany does have more central defenders back in his system, if he'll maybe go to a back 3, or we'll see kind of more defensive fullbacks in that team. Whether it's someone like a central defender at right back, and then they all shuffled over to allow Davies to continue doing what he does. But that's just the way that Guardiola gets around this problem, and that's and another thing, they just simply don't counter-attack Manchester City because they don't want an end-to-end game. It's boring football. It drives me up the wall watching the Premier League because Arsenal have copied them and also play centre defenders at fullback. But it might be something that Kompany might have to consider if Bayern Munich are going to continually get turned over in the counter-attack.
You can't play like that in Germany. You get booed out of the stadium. I mean, I think, we talk about this all the time. Bundesliga teams can't defend, but the fundamental reason why Bundesliga teams don't pay as much attention to defending and focus more on attacking is because Germans are a lot more like Americans and they want to see lots of goals. They don't have the patience for defensive football. an average German will never watch a 0-0 draw and say that was great football. You have to be a really big football geek to think that the 0-0 draw, if German context here, right? You have to be a really big German football geek to think that the 0-0 draw was an attractive game. It might have been, you and I might have appreciated, but the average German football fan will never, ever accept a 0-0 draw as an attractive football game. They're like, it's a very, like, many of our American listeners will listen to this and like, oh, this sounds like our friends. And I'm like, yeah, that's because it's a very similar mindset. They go to football games to be entertained. They will walk away from the 3-3 draw and say, wow, that was an incredible football match. Defending might have been crap, and it was, but no one cares. At the end of the day, the stadiums in Germany are full because the German Bundesliga scores tons and tons and tons and tons of goals. So I think, someone like Kompany can come in and implement the style of football that Guardiola plays, and he will get booed out of the stadium. In fact, we have the history by Munich coaches being booed because they played defensive football, right? What was it with Hitzfeld back in the day, where Rummenigge said football isn't mathematics because Hitzfeld won a lot of games 1-0, right? Even Pep Guardiola towards the end of his career was criticized for boring football, even though it was dramatically efficient. But I think that is something that I've been thinking about a ton. I think one of the reasons why you will never see the Premier League style of football in the Bundesliga is because the average German will simply not accept it.
Yeah, whereas a lot of, I think, English fans would happily see their team play defensively if it meant they win. So, I mean, if Kompany isn't going to play more defensively or play more defensive players, the alternative is you just outscore your opponents, and that was also a big issue in this game because Harry Kane was once again completely anonymous in this match, and it's something that obviously is troubling Bayern Munich fans. We had the ones in our chat talking about the prospect of signing John Duran or whoever else, and signing other strikers, but
that's a real story, by the way, Stefan. The Duran thing, that's a real story. He's on the list, but we'll save that for the winter when we have the transfer shops.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's an interesting conundrum as well because it's weird to say that I thought Bayern actually played quite well in this game, even though their defense was a mess and their striker was anonymous throughout the game. Everything in between worked quite well. I thought the midfield worked quite well. I thought Olise had a great game. I thought even Gnabry was quite sharp. So, everything worked there, but there is an issue with Harry Kane in this team in the sense that he's obviously not fit, and he's one of those players that if he's like only 90% fit, he plays like a 50% player. And one would imagine that during the international break, he'll have some sort of a break, even if he will be going on England duty. I'd imagine Bayern Munich will be kind of pressuring England not to play him a huge amount. Can say that, for example, Dominic Solanke, the Tottenham's record signing this summer, the striker, has been called up to the England team for the first time in 7 years. So we'll probably see him play for England at these games, and maybe Harry Kane only getting 45 minutes or even rested if they can get away with it because they're not playing big opponents. So, we might see Kane get rested and come back fit and suddenly looking like his old self. But it's another interesting conundrum because it's another kind of facet of the Pep Guardiola school of football is that his formations and his tactics, his teams very rarely accommodate the traditional striker. Now, of course, I know Man City currently have Erling Haaland up front, who's the most obvious striker that's ever existed in the world of football, but he himself at Manchester City is a bit of a exception. So it's just another maybe kink in the armor or something like that where Kompany maybe has to kind of tweak his tactics to get the best out of Kane in the system. But, we're 6 or 7 weeks in. No one expected Rome to be built in a day. And I guess Bayern can rest easy knowing that everyone else seems to be dropping points around them.
Yeah, I mean, going off the chat, Substack, it's such a good reminder of how volatile everything is at Bayern. It's 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, everything was amazing. Oktoberfest, blue sky, wonderful pictures, everyone happy. And now it's like 3 games, 2 draws, 1 defeat. Everything is the worst possible. The truth is somewhere in the middle.
Can Could I just draw an analogy to that, actually? Because
Yeah, go for
as
it.
you said that, it made me think of, it's some apocalyptic movie. I can't remember. Maybe it's The Walking Dead or The Last of Us or something. Or maybe it's quite a popular saying, but it's this old saying that society is only like 3 meals away from chaos, in the sense that, people will act civilized until there's no food left, and then they'll start ripping each other's heads off and, just
Yeah.
going full Mad Max all of a sudden. And it actually probably applies to Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich's only ever 3 poor performances away from absolute meltdown. And
That's
it feels like we're
accurate.
kind of on the cusp of that, but maybe the international break comes at a good time for Kompany.
Yeah, no, I think it just might. It all depends whether they can find some sort of injury to keep Kane home, because I think they might have to. I think there really is no point playing Kane. Again, England is in the UEFA Nations League B too, right, in the second division, so they should be able to handle those matches without Harry
Yeah,
Kane. You would
they're
assume.
not big games. It's Finland
Yeah.
and someone else, so they should be able to win them, yeah.